All right, let's get started, folks. Mustafa, are you here? Kyle is not here. Kyle's over there. Okay, he's keeping me on my toes. Sarah?
Yeah.
Late. Lucas, you're here. Mary is not here. Daniel?
Yeah.
Tim? Tim?
Yeah.
Okay. Alyssa? Alyssa? No, yes? Okay. Christina? Here. Gabriel?
Here.
Okay. Tylen? See, Don's here. Ksenia? Ksenia? Okay. Emmanuel?
Yeah.
Okay. Austin? Anaclete? Here. And Courtney's here. And Gordon?
He's sick.
He's sick?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, as I promised, so today we're going to talk about marketing and advertising. So we're going to open with a commercial break. Courtney, if you will, can you all see the screen? Y'all have it pulled up there?
Yes.
And then let me know if you don't have sound over there for the video.
If people say your dreams are crazy, if they laugh at what you think you can do, stay that way. Because what non-believers fail to understand is that calling a dream crazy is not an insult. It's a compliment. Don't try to be the fastest runner in your school or the fastest in the world. Be the fastest ever. Don't picture yourself wearing OBJ's jersey. Picture OBJ wearing yours. Don't settle for homecoming queen or linebacker. Do both. Lose 120 pounds and become an Ironman after beating the brain tumor. Don't believe you have to be like anybody to be somebody. If you're born a refugee, don't let it stop you from playing soccer for the national team at age 16. Don't become the best basketball player on the planet. Be bigger than basketball. Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. When they talk about the greatest team in the history of the sport, make sure it's your team. If you have only one hand, don't just watch football, play it at the highest level. And if you're a girl from Compton, don't just become a tennis player. Become the greatest athlete ever. Yeah, that's more like it. So don't ask if your dreams are crazy. Ask if they're crazy enough.
Well, what did y'all think of that commercial? Pretty good, inspiring. Oh, no more commercials, please.
Told me since the time I was young, if you have to tell people how good you are.
Okay. Oh, whew. So anyway, inspiring stuff, right?
Yes.
But we also read an article from the Gatestone Institute by Gordon Chang. So that was a Nike commercial, right? It was Nike saying, hey, you should buy our products because Colin Kaepernick says you should seize your dreams. But then we read this article from the Gatestone Institute, and it's citing a report from some Australian council. Did anybody get the name of it? Like the Australian Research Council or something like that. Courtney, we got can't see the class over there. Sorry. The report was titled Uyghurs for Sale, right? So there's minority Muslim population in China called the Uyghurs. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but it's something along those lines. And apparently, according to this report that Gordon Chang cites in his article, Nike, along with 82 other brands, have their products manufactured in part by this factory that employs 80,000 Uyghur and other Muslim minorities in China. And according to this report, they are forced to produce these products. The factory has watchtowers, barbed wire fences, police guard boxes, and they produce about 8 million shoes a year for Nike. And that may be, I don't know, did you catch if they clarify that was 8 million for Nike alone, or is that 8 million total for all these different brands, these 83 brands? Just Nike. That's a lot of shoes. That kind of factors in a little bit the fast fashion that we were talking about last week. I mean, that's a lot of shoes, but shoes wear out, so I guess people need them. But so we look at this commercial where, Colin Kaepernick tells you, dream big, let your dream be as big as you want it to be, or, don't let the man keep you down, man, right? Do you think these Uyghurs you think they have dreams? Not in those factories. But so, this article is a little bit similar, I thought, kind of to that Doe versus Walmart case where you had, now it's not exactly the same, obviously, but you've got, Nike is making this public statement, they're running on kind of this public social justice marketing campaign to say, everybody is going to have a fair shot, dream as big as you want to, nothing, no social norms or social expectations are going to hold people down. But then they have their shoes produced by people who aren't even allowed to leave the factory, or if they are, they're closely monitored. They've got, barbed wire and watchtowers and police guards. Would you want to work in a place like that? No. I'll let you all answer. Maybe you do. I don't. If they put up a tower outside this building, you'll have to find a new professor. I won't be coming. But so the article from Gordon Chang, and I do want to note, Gatestone Institute was kind of interesting, is if you were to rely on Wikipedia, which you should not, the Gatestone Institute, according to Wikipedia, all they say about it is this is an anti-Muslim, far-right extremist organization. And the whole Wikipedia article is just about how it's all anti-Muslim. But then they publish this article about how the Chinese Communist government is oppressing and arguably literally enslaving Muslims from the anti-Muslim Gatestone Institute. It's kind of interesting. But I think his article talks about the Tariff Act of 1930 and the Section 307. They had what's called the Consumption Exemption. He doesn't explain it in great detail, but essentially the idea with the Consumption Exemption was that if products if the products made within the United States were sufficient to meet the consumer demand within the United States, then if you bought products made by forced labor or slave labor or child labor elsewhere, no big deal. Now, they repealed that in 2015 or signed into law in 2016, which is good, but has that changed what's happening in terms of these companies bringing in products that are produced by forced labor in China and in other countries? No, you've still got the fast fashion, demand for, everybody they want the latest, I don't know, Air Jordans. I don't keep up with shoes, but whatever the latest cool Nike shoe is made by slaves in China. And, it brings up a lot of ethical kind of considerations or concerns. They do talk, I think it was this article that talked about these companies will get certifications. They can have these inspection companies conduct audits of these Chinese factories to say, oh yeah, this was totally slave labor free for sure. and the price difference between the products you buy that have been certified by the inspection companies amounts to, Gordon Chang argues, a bribe for these inspection companies to produce, I guess, presumably false audits to say, yeah, no forced labor here, nothing to see here, move along. So that obviously does raise a lot of significant ethical concerns. And it's, you know, you're saying one, you're talking the talk, but you're not walking the walk. In the case of Nike here, and probably some of these other companies, but Nike, of course, is very publicly, through their advertising, leading consumers to believe that they support social justice, they support, you know, true equality, they support, you know, raising up people who have, or groups that have been historically misrepresented, underrepresented, or oppressed, and yet the products from which they make money, lots of money, enough money to have high production value on their advertisements and pay Colin Kaepernick a lot of money to star in it and narrate it. You know, what they make their money off of is products produced by slave labor. And I guess, is this ethical? That's the question. Is that ethical? Does anyone think it is ethical? Let's get a show of hands. Is this ethical? Nobody? Nobody? Okay. What about a free market ethics? From a free market ethics standpoint, would this be ethical? Would Milton Friedman say, you can do that? You can say, we're all about social justice, and we're all about, you know, raising up the oppressed, but we're going to have slaves make our shoes. Would he say, yeah? Should free market ethics even be called free market ethics? You know, that's another question, but we don't have to worry about that one. So Friedman would say yes, because it's all about making money, right? Like, it's people to buy the products. They think that it's all comes from this, you know, feel good story, and the shoes aren't too expensive, you know, because you're not having to pay people fair wages. But pretty much, what about deontology? Now, what deontology, remember, is universal principles, right? What would a deontological ethicist say about this? No, this violates universal principles. This is not, it's not ethical. What about utilitarianism? Greatest good for the most people. You might be able to argue that either way. You know, you say, listen, 80,000 Uyghur Muslims versus 8 million shoes. You know, it's, what about, you know, people that don't have a lot of money and they don't want their kids running around barefoot, right? Except in the South. So they might say, yeah, you could make an argument under the utilitarian, you know, ethical school of thought that, yeah, maybe it is. But then I think you could also make a utilitarian argument that, you know, the greatest good is that we have, you know, people are not being enslaved to make products for, you know, so people can have their shoes slightly cheaper. I think that's one you could make arguments either way. Now, what about the ethics of care? You know, we're all one big happy family. No, like just grossly unethical, like the height of unethical. So it's an interesting food for thought, and a good kind of current example of how companies use advertising to influence consumers, and the ethical concerns that rise up in that context, particularly where, and you know, of course, Nike's not the only company doing this. 82 other companies are having their shoes or whatever products they are made in these slave labor factories. Now, I don't know what those 82 other companies are. Maybe they're not making commercials talking about social justice. Maybe they're making commercials that say, you know, cheap shoes. Hey, cheap shoes. And then it's like, okay, well, at least you're consistent here. But so it's, you know, it's an interesting stuff, interesting to think about. And I did find it pretty funny. I just Googled Gatestone Institute because I'd never heard of them before this article, and Wikipedia is just anti-Muslim, 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 anti-Muslim. And then I read this article about exposing how the Chinese are oppressing Muslim minority populations through these slave labor factories. So it's these things are just, they're interesting to think about. So moving into chapter 8, the reading for today. Oh, I do want to say case briefs. Overall, for the vast majority of you, I saw significant improvement from the first case brief to the second case brief, which is good. I hope that trend continues for the third one, but I think everybody, for the most part, pretty much everybody did a lot better on the second case briefs, and that makes my job easier, and I always appreciate that, so it'll be reflected in your grades. And so good job, everybody, on the second case briefs. So chapter 8, again, we're talking about, it's titled Marketing, Technology, Choice, and Manipulation, which I think is what we saw a good example of that with the Nike commercial, manipulating you to think this company stands for one thing when really they're all about that free market ethics. So in the 1970s, the book tells us that on average, consumers were exposed to between 500 to 2,000 advertisement messages a day, which is a lot. That seems like a lot. But now they're saying, as of 2015, 2016, when the book was written, you're looking at 3,000 to 5,000 or more a day. Now, of course, we have more ways of getting, or companies, advertisers have more means for getting their messages across to people. Billboards, radio, and TV obviously all existed in the 70s, but now you add on Facebook, other social media, website banners. You go visit a website and they'll have banners you can click on for ads. Google has ads. Ads, you're just ads everywhere. There's ads on the sides of buses. Some people's bumper stickers are basically ads. So we're just inundated with advertisements constantly. In 2016, ad expenditures in the country totaled approximately $178 billion. That's with a B, so you have to assume these people are making a whole lot of money if they're spending that kind of money just to get you to buy their products. So with advertisements, there's a question of, are advertisements free speech or a class of free speech protected by the First Amendment? Initially, they were not. You missed the commercial, Mary, but you wore the right shirt, though. And we were talking about how that was probably made by slaves in China. So, but well, really, yeah, I wish you'd seen the commercial. That would have been hilarious. But anyway, so to start with, until really 1976, courts did not consider advertisements to be free speech, speech that was, protected by the First Amendment. It was not, it was speech that was subject to government control, to regulation. And the courts had no problem with it until 1976. When they started, you saw kind of a run of cases in the Supreme Court where they set out, one, that advertisements are a form of free speech. They called it commercial free speech. And they set out some tests that we'll get into for determining whether, speech, I guess, the context in which the government can regulate commercial free speech. Now again, as with regular speech or just individual speech, only defamatory, obscene speech or speech that is likely to incite violence, that kind of speech is still not protected. So even if advertisements can't incite violence, they can't be obscene within certain limits. We'll actually find out that they can be somewhat obscene, but society's ideas of what is obscene changes over time. And I would know, interestingly enough, Thomas Jefferson, obviously a long time ago, he said that advertisements contain the only truths to be relied on in a newspaper. And we'll get into, misrepresentations in advertisements and truth in advertising. Maybe that was true back then, but that's probably not real accurate today. So in 1976, the Supreme Court, the first case they really looked at involved Virginia discount pharmacies in Virginia. I think they were called Virginia discount pharmacies, and they were trying to advertise their cheap pharmacy prices. And Supreme Court recognized that both that the advertisers have an economic interest in their speech, in their advertisements, their commercial free speech to help their business, and they had that consumers had an interest in hearing what the advertisers and what these companies had to say. You know, they didn't just have to walk in and find, well, I don't know what they're selling in there. I guess I'll have to walk in and find out. Instead, you can, turn on the radio and they tell you we sell widgets in this store. And they're like, okay, I don't need to go to that store. So it was the Virginia State Board of Pharmaceuticals versus the Virginia Citizens Consumer Council. And the court, in holding that, and I think there was, and I can't recall exactly the book, I don't know if they explain it exactly, that essentially advertising anything about pharmaceuticals was basically, or pharmaceutical prices was illegal in Virginia, and the government tried to stop them from doing it. The court linked the right to receive information and ideas, in the commercial context with the traditional values of free speech. So they said, and that's the first time they ruled that commercial free speech, advertisements, are a form of speech that is protected by the First Amendment. It's not protected as strongly as just individual speech, and the press or the media. They have greater First Amendment protections than advertisers do, but it is still a species of First Amendment protected speech. So then in 1977, a case out of Arizona, the Supreme Court ruled that lawyers can indeed advertise, and the world has been careening downhill ever since. Now you see, I don't know, Oglala and Burrill, I don't know if you all see them anymore. They kind of broke up. I think they probably got in a fight over money. But they used to have these just atrocious ads that were just really, really awful. You should Google them. They're hilariously bad. They're like those movies that are so bad they're good. These commercials, and I think they knew that, and they really just turn your wreck into a check. They'd have just a guy's like collapsed on a dock. They'd come in on jet skis. A guy falls over in a construction site. They'd drive a bulldozer over to him. No, lawyers don't do that in real life. It's ridiculous. But so anyway, lawyers can advertise, much to my chagrin, and I think to the detriment of my occupation as a whole, or my field as a whole. But lawyers can advertise. That is a form of protected free speech, commercial free speech. In 1978, in the First National Bank versus Bellotti case, that was where the court ruled, and that really for the first time, at least in this context, the corporations have First Amendment rights too. That's, again, to distinguish 76, they'd already ruled commercial free speech is protected by the First Amendment to a certain extent, but here they expressly say corporations, just the same as individuals, have First Amendment rights. Corporations are people too. That was a Massachusetts law, had criminalized corporations from advertising, bless you, advertising to influence voters for any, on any political issue, bless you, that did not, expressly affect their business. They said you can't advertise to influence voters in any way. That's illegal. It wasn't just, they made it a crime. And the courts said, well, that's, that violates the First Amendment. It limited the stock of information from which the public may draw. I can't remember exactly. Does anybody recall what specifically the bank was trying to advertise, what legislation they were trying to influence people to vote on?
Legislation for graduated income tax.
Oh, graduated income tax. They were against it, right? You would hope. Well, in the 70s were a weird time. People were all into taxes. But then in 1980, and this is the really important one, the Central Hudson Corporation case is called the Central Hudson case. And that's where the Supreme Court developed a 4-pronged test to determine, whether the government can regulate commercial speech. Starts off, it's 4 prongs, so it's not really like a 4-part test. It's really there's question 1. If you pass that, then there's a 3-part test. But 1, they said, listen, if it's misleading or it condones or advertises illegal activity, it's not protected by the First Amendment, period. You know, an outright misleading commercial or advertisement is not protected by the First Amendment. Then you go to the three-part test. If they're not advertising illegal activity or the advertisement is not misleading or false, you then have to look, does the government have a substantial interest in regulating the speech, the speech that is being regulated? If so, the regulation must serve that purpose and directly advance that government interest. And if it does, and if it passes that prong, then you have to also show, the government has to also show that the regulation is tailored to fit its purpose and is no more extensive than necessary. So again, misleading illegal advertisements, not protected. You get past that hurdle, which is pretty easy. You got to be a substantial government interest in regulating the speech. The regulation, it must serve this purpose and directly advance that government interest. And then 3, it's got to be tailored to fit that purpose and is no more extensive than necessary. We'll go over a couple of examples after we talk about the tobacco case. And I think the book, now I'm not a tobacco user, but the book is like aggressively anti-tobacco. I don't know if you all picked up on that, but they are absolutely aggressively anti-tobacco. So in 2009, there's the R.J. Reynolds versus the FDA. And this is, y'all might recall, this is when the FDA wanted every tobacco product needed to have pictures of, people smoking out of a tracheotomy or pictures of a dead guy that's been cut open in a morgue and pictures of crying babies. Just make it just awful. Make the cigarette packages just so terrible that no one would ever want to even be seen buying them, except for people that really like smoking. And there are a lot of those people. I got a friend who, he's not like, a lot of people are like, I wish I could quit. This guy's like, no, he loves it. He thrives on it. But so 2009, that case is from 2012, but there was a 2009 Tobacco Control Act, and it banned tobacco ads at sporting events within 1,000 feet of schools and public playgrounds, banned ads. Basically, you couldn't, if you were advertising in anything other than an adult-oriented magazine, the advertisement could only be black text on a white background. And buy cigarettes, I guess. And they had to include the graphic pictures of the health hazards of tobacco use, and primarily smoking, but there are other forms of tobacco. And the court ruled, or the majority ruled, that the FDA failed to provide even a shred of evidence that the graphic warnings would directly advance its interest in reducing smoking. So we look at the Central Hudson test. What was the government interest here in regulating the tobacco advertisements? Though their interest, the stated government interest was reducing smoking, right? Then the regulation had to directly advance that substantial government interest. And here, the court says having these graphic pictures does not directly advance that interest. I think they had cited to some Canadian studies that had found putting the graphic pictures on there had reduced smoking rates among children or youth, not children, but young people in Canada, hopefully not children. In Canada, young people in Canada, it had dropped, a few percentage points. The majority did not find that very convincing. They said, no, it was already going down before that.
Didn't they enact other regulations at that time?
Oh yeah, and they coupled it with, you can't smoke anywhere. You can't smoke in your own house with the curtains drawn. They didn't go obviously not that far, but they banned it in public places. You couldn't smoke basically anywhere. And people, y'all remember, used to be able to smoke in restaurants. I might be, some of you might be too young for that, but you do. Yeah, that was. I got to tell you again, I don't use tobacco. People want to use it, it's fine. I'm glad they don't allow smoking in restaurants anymore. It's pretty gross. It's just like, who wants to eat and smoke? Well, people who smoke do. They think it's great. But so majority rules here. Well, one, we don't care about this study from Canada. First off, they're Canadians, and second off, they had all these other regulations, like you pointed out, Austin. and it was going down before that anyway. So, and they pointed out, there was no proof that consumers, they can show that if we put these grotesque pictures on there, people will think more about quitting, but there's no proof that thinking about quitting equates to actually quitting. That people are still smoking. If they're still smoking, then clearly it's not working. But what the court was really concerned about, again, the majority here, what they were really concerned about was that not only was the FDA significantly limiting tobacco companies' ability to advertise, it also forced them to bear the cost, of disseminating an anti-smoking message. They said, not only can you not advertise your products, you have to advertise in a way that makes people less likely to buy your products. That's pretty onerous. We're not talking about smoking. Nobody likes smoking is gross, but still, that's basically saying we are going to put you out of business and you're going to pay for it. So, and I think one of the courts said, that the government finds speech too persuasive, does not permit it to quiet the speech or to burden its messengers. And that's essentially the argument here, is that tobacco ads they were too good. Seeing the Marlboro Man, right off into the sunset, man, who wouldn't want to smoke a pack of Marlboro Reds after that, right? But the dissent, I really think that judge might have lost a family member to lung cancer or something. He was like aggressively, he was just like, this is great. They clearly proved that pictures of people on the autopsy table is clearly related to the message that smoking can result in death. No one told him that not smoking can also result in death. In fact, in high school, we had this school newspaper, whatever. This guy did this cartoon. This was back when the anti-smoking, messaging was pretty strong in high schools. They were kind of pushing it. And he did this little comic that said, studies show that 100% of people who smoke die. Would you kiss a dead person? And this was back, I guess, when they said, would you want to kiss a smoker? I thought it was kind of funny. But yeah, that's 100% people, 100% of people who don't smoke die. Everyone's going to die. But it's just how we get there, right? So the dissent was very aggressively opposed to smoking, obviously, and they thought that the FDA was totally fine, that the substantial government interest in reducing smoking, if you add these grotesque, awful graphic pictures, and the dissent found that basically every burden that the FDA had put on these tobacco companies was totally fine, totally passed the Central Hudson test. Not only was there substantial interest in reducing smoking, but that these graphic pictures directly advanced that interest, and that it was no more extensive than necessary. I think that's, regardless of how you feel about smoking or about tobacco use, that's still, I don't know, that's pretty aggressive. But does anybody agree with the dissent in the R.J. Reynolds case? Anybody agree with the majority opinion? Everyone's kind of ambivalent about smoking. We don't have any tobacco users, do we? You don't have to expose it.
That third element, I don't understand the tail of the fit. So I can understand that it's in the government interest, and I understand that it would directly advance the government's objectives, but no more extensive. Because what they're doing is they're trying to really put them out of business. That is what they're.
Yeah, that's essentially what it comes down to, is not only can you not advertise like you used to be able to, you're going to advertise in direct opposition to what you're selling, to what you're in business to do. Yeah, it might be worth pointing out, maybe not, but tobacco was like literally more than half the reason the colonies in America were founded was tobacco. That literally built half this country, was built on tobacco. But, I don't know that really matters at this point. But yeah, it is. And I think now, are you saying you just don't understand that portion of the test in general, or you mean in terms of this R.J. Reynolds case?
No more extensive than is necessary. to achieve the government's objective, which is to eliminate smoking and
Yeah.
to take away that cost.
Well, and then it's saying no more extensive than necessary in terms of it does not impose any more of a burden on advertisers and on businesses than is necessary to achieve that government interest. So that the burden only rises to that level that's this is how much we need. Don't go any further beyond
No
that.
longer exists.
Yeah, until it's gone, in this case, but it was very clear what the FDA was trying to do. They were just trying to directly put tobacco companies just out of business altogether. And the court said, no, that is too aggressive. These corporations have their First Amendment rights and you are trampling all over them. So the majority says, no good. Fails the Central Hudson test. And again, when it comes to government regulation of free speech, the Central Hudson test that's the key test. That's the main, analysis you're going to use, and that the courts use. You all may not have to do it, but you may have to for a multiple choice question on the exam. So just keep that in mind. Maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, that's the Central Hudson test. Government can regulate speech in the context of advertisements, but only under limited circumstances. So there are a few examples, the book does another, after you read this long chapter, research 15 other cases and see what happened. And I'm sure you all did that. So tell me what happened in the city of Baltimore wanted to ban alcohol and tobacco advertisements, primarily billboards, that were near schools and playgrounds. I don't know if they put a specific, they probably put a specific, 1,000 feet or something like that. Did anybody see what happened with the city of Baltimore's ban on alcohol and tobacco advertisements near schools and playgrounds? Well, the Fourth Circuit upheld the ban. I don't know what happened in the lower courts, but who cares? Fourth Circuit upheld it, and they're the big ones. Now, as everybody know, I think I talked to Mary about this, how the federal court systems work. You have, so a lot of things like the booking.com case, starts at a kind of this low administrative level. That's not always how it happens. There was the PTO appeal board, but then you have, in terms of just this traditional federal court system, you have district courts. Tennessee's got 3 eastern, west, and middle and western sections of the district courts for the United States. Those are federal. Then they go up to the circuit courts. In Tennessee, we're in the 6th Circuit. That's comprised of 4 states. And then from the circuit court, you can appeal, or you can request permission to appeal up to the Supreme Court. So when I say 4th Circuit, we're talking about federal cases. 4th Circuit is Virginia, Maryland, and a couple other states. The 4th Circuit in the Baltimore case, they upheld the city of Baltimore's ban on those advertisements. That's, again, using the Central Hudson case. What they say here is the government has a substantial interest in protecting children and from not having children exposed to advertisements that would, make them want to smoke and drink, or that would encourage them or try to tell them that, hey, smoking and drinking is cool, you should do it. Well, we don't want the kids to see that. Wait until they're in college and then have at it. But they found there's a legitimate interest in protecting children from that. That's the government's interest. Banning those billboards, those advertisements, only where it's near schools and playgrounds. They didn't just ban them outright. They said you can't have them near schools and playgrounds. That directly advanced that interest of protecting children from being exposed to, cigarettes and booze. And the final one, no more stringent than necessary. They say, hey, not having them around schools and playgrounds, that's exactly, that's no more than is necessary, but it still achieves that government goal, right? That substantial government interest. Next one is the Bad Frog Brewery. They had a label for their beer where the frog with his little webbed toes wasn't this, it was read between the lines. basically the frog was, again, read between the lines. He was, frog was making an obscene gesture, right? On the label of this beer, I guess it was, or cider or something like that, some kind of alcohol. They went to the New York, well, basically to get brand label approval from whatever New York's alcohol board. And it was denied. They said, this is obscene. There's no way we're going to let you sell this beer that has a frog giving people the bird. It's obscene. No. How do you think, and that ended up going to the Second Circuit, which is the federal circuit that includes the state of New York. How do you all think the Second Circuit ruled using the Central Hudson test on New York's alcohol board denying brand label approval for the frog giving the bird on a beer? They what? Yes, they did. They, the pro frog, they were pro bad frog. So using the Central Hudson test there, you know, what was the stated government, what was the substantial government interest there? Did you say it was not subjecting, not having the public be subjected to obscene imagery is probably, that's essentially what they're arguing. I don't know if that's how they worded it, but that's essentially their argument is this label is obscene and we're protecting the public from your gross labels. That even there, like the first part of the test, that's pretty weak. And the court pointed out, they say, listen, I mean, but imagery and what society believes is obscene or finds obscene, that's kind of, those standards are changing. Some would argue loosening. A lot of people wouldn't really even find that obscene. And then the regulation here was they were just banning the image outright. Did that directly advance the government's substantial interest? Well, I mean, conceivably, yes, but was it a substantial interest or was it a legitimate substantial interest here? You know, it probably fails the first prong of the test. So you really don't even get to 2, but then you get to 3. Was it no more stringent than necessary? No. You know, if it was something that said, listen, we're going to ban this if you sell you know, where are they selling the beer? It's not like they're selling it at schools. You know, you're not protecting it's one thing for the advertisements not being around a school or a playground, right? But when you're talking about the label on a beer, you know, when you can buy much worse things at all kinds of weird stores, you know, if you're of the appropriate age. So Second Circuit says, no, that fails the Central Hudson test. You are infringing on Bad Frog Brewery's free speech, First Amendment, commercial free speech rights. And then finally, they talked about the Alfred Caronia case. And this guy was essentially this drug. It was some kind of narcolepsy drug. And this guy was going around promoting off-label uses for this narcolepsy drug. I don't know what off-label uses he was talking about. He was going around saying, hey, use this prescription drug, but use it for other stuff. It's great. And he actually was put on trial on criminal charges. And they had this state law that said if you promote off-label uses of prescription drugs, you know, we're gonna throw you in prison. I don't know if it was like, you know, you'd get years in prison for it. Is probably, you know, a fine and maybe 6 months or something like that. But you would face potential criminal penalties for promoting off-label usage of a prescription drug. And he argued as part of his defense in the criminal proceedings that it was violating his First Amendment rights. So this is interesting because you're not really talking about this is actually an individual, but still promoting, he's still engaging in commercial free speech, you know, because he's advertising on his own off-label, non-approved uses of a drug that has been approved by the FDA for certain uses. And the Second Circuit ends up accepting his First Amendment argument. You know, he gets appealed all the way up to the Second Circuit, and they actually ended up accepting his First Amendment argument. And, you know, they ruled that the misbranding provision of the FDCA, that's the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act that kind of regulates how food and drugs and cosmetics are labeled. It neither prohibits nor criminalizes the truthful off-label promotion of FDA-approved prescription drugs. So it's kind of interesting. right? They say as long as it's truthful. Now, how do they determine if it's truthful? I guess they would have to show that, this off-label use I'm promoting is actually backed up by, scientific studies, or there's a factual basis for this off-label use. But essentially they say, you can promote that if it's truthful. Of course, if you promote off-label use of a prescription drug and it's not truthful, people start dropping like flies, then you're not going to get First Amendment protections. You're probably going to get locked up. So then the book gets back into tobacco. And they really like that dissent in the R.J. Reynolds case. And they talk about the World Trade Organization. Australia passed this plain packaging law. They said by basically tobacco products had to be just wrapped in like plain brown paper or something, and which would be kind of classy. I'd be like, maybe I'd pick up smoking then. I don't know. No, not really. But these tobacco companies were like, this is ridiculous. You can't. All these other companies get to advertise and have all these colorful advertisements and stuff, and we just have these plain brown boxes full of coffin nails. It's not fair. And Australia says, well, we don't care. And they said, well, we're appealing this to the World Trade Organization. It's like, clearly they don't know what the World Trade Organization is made up of. The World Trade Organization was like, we think the ban's great, get out. And so it got upheld. In the book, it says by 2030 is estimated that tobacco will be the biggest cause of death globally. They didn't anticipate coronavirus. So wrong again, right? So do I? It's like, no, coronavirus, actually. Tobacco's number 2. So the book asks about ethical considerations of tobacco companies marketing their products in developing countries. And they go on about how, tobacco usage is on the rise in certain countries in Africa. It's on the rise in India. And it's on the rise in China as well. There's a lot of, and its usage is it's increasing every year. And that's why I guess the book's argument that by 2030, it's gonna just be killing people all over the place, except here, maybe. What do y'all think? What are there any ethical considerations in tobacco companies marketing their products in developing countries? Does anybody see any sort of ethical concerns with that?
The population isn't aware of the concerns of the health and scientific medical concerns, all the data that points in a really towards a bad outcome for the users.
Yeah.
And the tobacco makers tend to capitalize on that ignorance, so then have an issue with that.
Yeah. I think that's a fair argument. The tobacco companies are like, they have vitamin C in them. They're great. Makes your breath better. But no, and in all seriousness, they probably are capitalizing on ignorance. Now, tobacco companies would say, no, they just haven't had the opportunity. If we could have shipped these cigarettes over earlier, we would have done it. If people, they want them, they want to smoke. But you probably don't have, there's not, because it hasn't been, a widespread social phenomenon or issue in those countries. They don't have government programs, that are seeking to disseminate information as to the dangers of smoking, like we've had in this country for many, many years, and in Europe and other developed nations. So I think that's a very fair point, that they are likely, at least in part, seeking to capitalize on ignorance as much as they are on untapped consumer bases, right? But are there any arguments on the flip side? Anybody say there is?
So, as a human being, you're not supposed to smoke, and I feel like that should be common sense, whether it's healthy. Like somebody advertising tobacco to you, smoking, whether you know the dangers or not, shouldn't you as a human know that that's wrong, or it's bad for you at least?
you know, if you're, I don't know, what if you're watching like an old John Wayne movie and he's just hammering them back, you know, by the time the movie's over, he smoked 8 packs. And you're like, boy, John Wayne is cool. And you know what makes him cool? I think it's the smoking that does it. Does that kind of influence you, right? And I think that's the whole concept, you know, we're talking about here is how these advertisements can influence people, not even, and they maybe even don't realize it. You know, it's just the cumulative effect of seeing this and seeing, okay, I want to be cool. I want to feel accepted. I want people to think I'm cool. And if I smoke, even though, you know, gosh, those first couple of cigarettes were really gross and I coughed a lot, and that's why do people do this? But you keep seeing that advertisement, you keep seeing, you know, the Marlboro Man or Joe Camel. And the guy's a camel. I don't know why that was ever effective. It's like, look like a camel. I don't know. But the idea was it's cool, right? And you want to, they're pushing this concept that, hey, if you smoke, people are going to think you're cool. You'll be more accepted socially. So even though, you know, you take that first cigarette, you smoke that first cigarette, and your body, it's like absolutely rejecting it. And it's like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? You know, we're in a fire, get out, you know, you start hacking and coughing, but you keep doing it, body adapts to it, eventually you become addicted and you just need that nicotine rush. And there's a decent argument that it's because of the perceptions pushed by these tobacco companies that people are doing it. Now, how much of that is, you know, that's not necessarily the only reason, certainly not the only reason that people do it. That people start smoking. And again, like I mentioned, I got a friend that genuinely loves smoking. He loves it. He thinks it's great. He sits there and he smacks on Nicorette gum when he can't smoke. And then as soon as he break comes, he's running out to his car to knock a few back, right? And he just loves it. And he makes fun of people that quit smoking. And that's what he likes to do. You know, he likes it. But, you know, that's the idea here is, yes, you know, people should know, or well, should know. I mean, it seems obvious to us who have enjoyed the benefit of information from scientific and medical sources to tell us, hey, tobacco use can lead to, you know, substantial health problems. Of course, that's not universal. I know people that have smoked for decades and they're all worried about it, and they go to the doctor and he's like, you're totally fine. Lungs are clear. Everything's fine. You don't have cancer. And then some people don't smoke that much and they get lung cancer. You know, it's kind of genes probably do play a role. But again, it's these companies, and not even necessarily in the concept of, or in the area of tobacco usage, is that advertisements can push a certain message, and they push people to, they influence people's perceptions, people's beliefs, and people's, most importantly, to the advertisers and the companies, people's spending habits. And that's really the goal, right?
In developing countries, you're meaning as in like a little higher than third world countries?
It would include, you know, they're always sort of vague on developing countries. They still throw China in there, and it's like, is that really fair? No, I really don't think it is. Some of y'all might disagree with me, but China is absolutely, they've developed just as much as they want to. Mm-hmm. But they'll still claim to be a developing country to get the benefits of that designation. But you know, they still have billboards. You know, even in I'm sure there are countries in Africa and areas of India where there'll be billboards. They have radio. You know, it's not like they're living in the dark ages or the Stone Age. They've got the, you know, internet is in most places now. People have smartphones all over the world. So, I mean, the flip side is, you know, technology is not, it is available to a lot of the world now more so than it was even 10 years ago. You know, there've been significant changes there. So people conceivably would have access to information to tell them, hey, smoking's bad, you probably shouldn't do it, but might not be available to them in their language. Their governments, you know, haven't caught up, maybe. I don't know if that'd be the right way to put it. But they also have the book talks about the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, and which is this worldwide sort of treaty almost worldwide treaty on how tobacco can be advertised, and it puts a lot of limits on what tobacco companies can do and how they can push their products. How effective is it? Well, the book tells us that smoking is on the rise in all these countries that have signed on to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. So clearly it's not working, but or the way they want it to. The book does ask anybody look to see if the United States is a signatory to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. No, it is not. George Bush in 2001 or whenever it was failed to send it to Congress. We might have had something else to deal with in 2001. I'm not sure. Might have had bigger fish to fry than worrying about smoking. And of course, tobacco companies still have, or at least at that time, still had a lot of pull in this country. Because again, this country was in large part built on tobacco, and tobacco companies hold a lot of power in terms of lobbying. So the US has not signed on, Argentina's not signed on, Indonesia hasn't. There are a few countries in Africa that haven't, but otherwise there are a whole lot of countries that have signed on to this tobacco control convention. And the convention was held in Geneva, Switzerland. Switzerland did not sign, which they never sign anything. They're like, have your peace convention here. We are absolutely not signing it. But that's a very Swiss thing to do, to have a peace convention and be like, we're not signing that crap. But spend your money here and then please leave. But so it does raise the question. It really didn't occur to me just now that the book talks about smoking's on the rise in all these countries. It's not ethical for these tobacco companies to be pushing their products in these developing world nations, but all these developing nations signed the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. So clearly the smarter people work for the tobacco companies, not for whoever was running that convention. And then the book talks about Crazy Horse malt liquor, which I didn't know that was a thing, but Crazy Horse malt liquor, this malt liquor company named one of their drinks Crazy Horse. And of course, this is I think, Native American use of Native American names and logos and symbols is obviously a big subject of debate, or was recently with the Washington Redskins. That's because that name was so offensive. They will now be known only as the Redskins. Just kidding. I like that joke though. Washington's terrible. But the Washington football team, the Cleveland Indians, I don't know, they changed their mascot. I don't know if they're going to change their name. The Atlanta Braves getting rid of the I guess the chop or something. Land O'Lakes got rid of the Native American woman on their butter. Didn't even care. They just took her off, and it's just like Stalin erasing people from the photographs. It's like never happened. No. It's always been like that. What are you talking about? But they sued, or I guess the sue. I'm sorry, Aunt Jemima. Yeah, that's what's interesting is actually Aunt Jemima they found out it was a woman who, I think she was a former slave, but she was the original kind of spokesperson for Aunt Jemima, and she actually made a lot of money off of it and used that to support a lot of programs for the poor sections of Chicago. Used a lot of it for education purposes in Chicago, and in fact, I think who knows? You can't believe anything you read on the internet, regardless of what Abraham Lincoln says on the subject. Y'all see that? You can totally believe everything on the internet, Abraham Lincoln. But apparently, again, I don't know if this is true, but apparently some of her descendants have expressed some sort of, they're not too happy with the decision to completely do away with Aunt Jemima. They said, we feel like we're kind of being written out of history here. And it's like, yeah, welcome to the club. But that aside, Crazy Horse malt liquor, and I think they had there's a group of maybe I can't remember did they say did the book tell you? I think they sued. They might have like a Native American rights group might have sued the malt liquor company, and the judge said, even though we may find this speech particularly insensitive, especially when you look in the context of issues faced in the Native American community with respect to alcoholism, much higher incidence of fetal alcohol, babies being born with fetal alcohol syndrome. Alcoholism has had a devastating effect on the Native American community, has for centuries. I don't think anybody can really dispute that. And it probably Crazy Horse malt liquor, that's pretty offensive, particularly given Crazy Horse, even though he was a military leader who led warriors in battle against United States troops. That's okay sometimes, not okay in other times, in terms of how people perceive it. But the court said, or this judge, he said, listen, it may be particularly insensitive, but a price we pay in this country for ordered liberty is that we are often exposed to that which is offensive to some, perhaps even to many. And I think that's that's an idea that is kind of fading away in this kind. I don't want to say fading away, but it's an idea that is not nearly as popular as it used to be in this country, which was that, listen, the antidote or the answer to speech you don't like is more speech, not getting rid of the speech you don't like. We have some interesting, the book's obviously a couple years behind us, a few years behind us now, so you don't have the interesting additional issues raised by private corporations that are now able to effectively control speech on a very wide scale, with Twitter and Facebook, and just ban people they don't like, ban ideas they don't agree with. And then they just turn around and say, start your own social media giant. It's like, oh yeah, that's really realistic. I'm totally going to do that. That'll work. Give me, 15 years and then Facebook will still stomp you out anyway. But anyway, so with Crazy Horse, and it was interesting. I don't know if y'all caught at the end, the brewery apologized. Their president went and made this big apology to the Sioux people, to descendants of Crazy Horse, and and the Sioux and Lakota people. And he made a gift, which is sort of like almost in a way, a gift of horses and blankets and beads and 32 twists of tobacco. No mention of how terrible tobacco is. Like, this is great, and it's like, did that come with the cancer warning? Did you have the picture of the tracheotomy on there? But, and it was also, it's like someone apologizing to, descendants of English people in America and paying us in like British sterling. Like, what am I gonna do with this? How about some money? But, hey, here's some horses and some twists of tobacco, because you all are still living out in the plains in your teepees, right? It's like a little bit insulting. It's like, what? I mean, what are we doing here? But and on that, one more note on the Native American stuff. FSU, and my great uncle who just passed, he would. Have you all ever watched Seminoles football games? You all seen the intro? It's cool. Oh man, like my great uncle, he just passed, and he would be rolling in his grave. He is rolling in his grave hearing me say this, but it's like the coolest intro in college football. I think it's awesome. Like, it's really cool. He was a big Vols fan. But the FSU intro is really cool. And FSU has no intention of changing anything to do with their mascot, with their team name, and with their uniforms. But they work very close. They're like basically have a partnership with the Seminole tribe. The Seminole people consult with them on, how to make their intro be, accurate as far as to the Seminole traditions and things like that. And their new uniforms, the logos are like actual Seminole logos. So it's interesting where you see, some people can argue, hey, just getting rid of all this Native American imagery, is that really, supporting this idea of tolerance and acceptance, or is this just kind of removing the only images we really have of Native Americans still in this country? But you see FSU can do it in a way that, everybody's kind of on the same page with it. So it's fortunate that you do see it there. And if y'all haven't seen the FSU intro, it's worth watching it on YouTube. I mean, it really is. It's like the coolest intro in college football. So I did think it was interesting, though, the book talking about the 32 twists of tobacco. I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, on the same page, tobacco bad, but not here. Tobacco good here. So anyway, John Kenneth Galbraith, The Dependence Effect. And this was a pretty lengthy, sort of almost esoteric, he's this economist and philosopher, he's dead now. But what was he really arguing about here? What point was he making in the dependence effect? Anybody want to take a stab at that? This one was probably pretty tough to read. I just kind of start glazing over a little bit. But his big point here is, I think probably the biggest thing first he talks about demons. And you're like, demons, what is this guy going on about? But the real point he's making is that production only fills a void that it itself has created. So the idea here is, do you really need, all these products that are being advertised? And you see the advertisement, you're like, oh, thank you. That is exactly what I've been needing all along. Or is it you hear the advertisement and you're like, oh, that sounds cool. Maybe I'll get that. Which is it? It's probably a mixed bag there. But, he makes the point that like a man who is hungry has no need to be told of his need for food. You don't have to tell him, hey, you need food, you're hungry. He's like, you already know that, right? You're going to go find some food. And it's really this kind of distinction between wants and needs, I think you could say, is what he's talking about here, that wants are dependent on production. And he points out that the startling contrast between private consumption and want, which has outweighed, or he argues, and I think with a lot of justification, that it is grossly outweighed or disproportionately outweighed public need. He talks about, and this was written actually in 1958, I think. And he talks about, families you're driving down this road with your big new fancy Cadillac or whatever people drove in the 50s. And the roads are all just falling apart around you. You drive into the countryside, it's just billboards every 100 feet. You can't even see the countryside anymore. And you go camp out in your nylon tent next to a stream that's so polluted, you wouldn't consider drinking out of it. And so you're buying all this more and more stuff while schools are underfunded, public roads are in disrepair. And that's kind of the dilemma he's talking about. That's the dependence effect, is we are creating dependency on these products, but it's really these companies that are creating this dependency. Through their advertising, they're making people believe, not that they need things, but that, hey, you should want this. And that's creating people's desire is being created by the people who are producing the stuff that they then think they want through these advertisements, right? Anybody disagree with Galbraith's characterization of the dependence effect, his theory here, his thesis? Or do you think he's maybe has it pretty close? I mean, this is 1958. That's, what would that, oh my gosh, that's like 63 years ago. Does anybody think that still applies today, that his argument is still valid today? More valid today? More valid today? Yeah.
You said like earlier, you said like you see like 3,000 advertisements a day.
Yeah.
That would assume like we have 3,000 needs per day.
Yeah, there were 3,000 wants. Like, yeah. We only have a few needs, but we got a lot of wants. These sweet new Nike shoes and stuff. Colin Kaepernick, you're like, man, I want some Nikes. Yeah, I think it has in it, and again, that idea between private wants and public needs, and it's still true. And it was true in 1958. It's true today, more true today, maybe, that you've got schools that are underfunded, underperforming. You've got the have-nots, are struggling, continue to struggle. And I think that's just I don't know if we're ever going to be able to fix that problem. That predates this country. predates. I mean, that's to the beginning of civilization itself, probably. So that's bigger than the scope of this class. We'll have to talk about that one. But, probably more true today than it was in 1958. That problem has only become worse. Maybe the streams are a little bit cleaner. I don't know. I've drunk out of streams in the Smokies without filtered water. We were real thirsty. We were out of water. And then it was actually fine, but it was coming right out of the mountain. It wasn't a stream, it wasn't Third Creek. But so does anybody disagree with Galbraith here? I think I already asked that. Nobody disagrees?
The thing with Galbraith is that I got kind of turned around in his writing, I guess, but this section starts with a quote from another guy. It's one line, and I thought it was excellent. It says, in terms of advertising economics, it says, did what all ads are supposed to do, create an anxiety relievable by purchase.
Yep. And that really is what, in a single sentence, the entire premise behind advertisements, at least today, or for the 20th and 21st century. That is exactly, we need to create, oh man, if you don't have this product, you are not cool. One, you're just lame, and all the other, if you want to be cool, buy this product. Be like, don't you need, I really like what are the ones you see on like the infomercials where they're like the guy in black and white and he's like, are you tired of dealing with a garden hose? And the guy's like falling all over himself and he like can't manage a garden hose, and if you get like the pocket hose that expands and like everything's in bright vivid color, and he's like, oh, he's so happy. I love those ads. They're hilarious. It's like, are you a bumbling idiot? Get this product and it'll fix it all. That's essentially, what they're saying. So Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, has been around for a while, actually. It was established by the Federal Trade Act in 1914, and which that act outlaws unfair methods of competition and unfair or deceptive acts and practices. That would include deceptive advertising, which the FTC regulates. So you've got implied and expressed deceptive advertising. What do they mean there? Expressly deceptive advertising is exactly what it sounds like. The ad is just outright false and they're just lying to your face, right? And that's an easy one for the FTC. Like, listen, you all lied, pull this ad down, put up a new ad telling everyone you lied, or we'll put you out of business altogether. Implied deceptive advertising. The book talks about, you can saying things like medically proven. It's medically proven that this herbal supplement will increase your energy levels. And how is that deceptive? Why is that impliedly deceptive?
Clinical trials.
Yeah. We're leading people to believe essentially that you say medically proven, and people think, oh my gosh, well, they've had a team of scientists have been, giving rats the herbal supplements for the past couple of years, and the rats seem to be doing better. That's like the implication, it's like, hey, doctors and scientists agree this stuff must be great. If it's medically proven, then it has to be safe or effective. And usually it's not, right? Usually it's just a total scam. So that would be an example of implied deceptive advertising. It can include failure to disclose. So even where what they say is truthful. The example the book gives is like AOL would do free trial for AOL, but they don't tell you, say, hey, it's a free trial, but you sign up and you give them your credit card information. And then after that free trial's up in a month or whatever, they just start automatically billing you. And the opt-out option, of course, this was back in the day before smartphones and all that, it's buried in you have to mail off to some PO box and, some small town in Texas that they check once a year. But if you don't read that fine print and specifically opt out, you get charged a bunch of money. But what you were led to believe was, I get this free trial, and that was it. I got a free trial. And then essentially what they've led the consumer to believe is, in that example, would be, okay, I get a free trial, and if I don't like it, then I just don't say anything, and free trial's up. when in fact they needed to say free trial, and then you'll be automatically enrolled and we'll start billing you unless you tell us otherwise, unless you expressly opt out. And I think now they still do free trials like that, but I think they're better now about saying, hey, you have to unsubscribe or let us know you don't want to do this anymore. And again, the FTC that regulates all these ads, truthfulness in advertising, they can require you to run new ads to correct misrepresentations. They can, now they don't have to go up there and say, we lied to you on our last ad, we're really sorry. You just have to run a new ad where you're basically changing what you're saying to either include information you left out or changing misrepresentations you had made previously. So there are 3 types of deceptive ads, major types of deceptive ads that the book talks about, or that the FTC has kind of identified. They're the news format ads or government source ads. And you might have seen these, and you still probably do see them on the internet various times, is where they'll say, it'll be like Channel 6 News, this great product, and it looks like it's a reporter out like in the field, with their microphone, but it's actually an ad. So people are thinking there's some sort of legitimate, this is like a news source is talking about this ad, and it must be real. It must do exactly what it's saying, when actually it's a fake journalist. It's not a real news site. Or they will say there's a government source, the government approved, or the government trials or something like that. Those are problematic. Those are deceptive because, again, they're leading people to believe that, something other than people this company paid to advertise their product has endorsed it. That a legitimate, I guess, uncompensated, unbiased source has endorsed this product, when in fact that's not what happened. It's just an ad. Same thing, misleading door openers. That's one that they've kind of banned or had problems with for a long time. They call them door openers because back when people used to sell encyclopedias door to door, that predates even me. So I don't know that anyone here would remember that, but they'd come in and they'd give you some sort of, they'd say they were there for one thing, and then they try to get their way in the door. They're like, actually, I'm here to sell you encyclopedias. And this was before the internet, so people, encyclopedias were useful back then, maybe. But you get it now. You get unsolicited emails, clickbait, those sorts of things, where it's like, some article and be like, oh man, like Tennessee drivers won't believe how they can save money on car insurance. You're like, oh, click, and it's some just absolute garbage. It's not even close to that. Clickbait would probably fall in there, misleading door openers. And that's even like news sites. They have like the real, where you read one article and then they got the list for the next articles that are real. Then they got a bunch of like clickbait articles that are absolutely not news at all. And then deceptive endorsements, they'll have primarily that's when, when you buy crappy products on Amazon, it's like, well, it's got 5,000 5-star reviews, but it's like a PR firm that just pumped out, most of those reviews are all just, this product's great, like best app ever. And it's all fake reviews, and it leads people to believe, these individuals that had purchased this product thought it was great. No, it was actually a PR firm that just generated a bunch of these reviews to make it seem like a bunch of people liked it. So that would be deceptive. Those are all deceptive methods of advertising. And then the FTC, and we actually get an example of the FTC engaging in regulatory action, you could say, a lawsuit against the Wellness Support Network. Now, what happened in the FTC versus Wellness Support Network case? Anybody?
There was a couple that in California, I think, that did some internet research and found that they could offer some supplements that would benefit diabetics. And so they started selling these things over the course of, I guess, 8 years, for about $2.2 million worth of products.
Yeah. And what was the what problems? I mean, what they did was they had, they would get the search engines to actually, like if you typed in cure diabetes, diabetic cure, they would pop up. And they're like, clinically proven natural solution with 90% success rate and reverse the effects of diabetes. Like they were making pretty substantial claims. And I mean, diabetes is obviously a significant health issue, especially in this country, thanks to McDonald's and Coca-Cola and others. But, they're essentially saying this natural product, like they had one review where the guy said, you can just throw the medicine. You got McDonald's. I was absolutely just trashing McDonald's,
Even worse.
Yeah, you were saying like, one review where the guy's like, throw the diabetes medicine out the window, didn't even need it for a month. And that's, you're making claims like that, and people are like, oh gosh, I don't want to have to sit there and prick my finger every day and take insulin shots, and I don't have diabetes. I don't know exactly what all it entails, but I think it entails those things. And you probably, maintain, it's a constant maintenance of treatment for diabetes, right? And people think, if I don't have to do all that, I can just take this natural herbal supplement. That sounds great. Well, then you probably have some people that would suffer some pretty severe consequences, because it's like, if you're not treating your diet or not managing it appropriately, and you're just trying to take some, yarrow root and parsley or whatever that was in this stuff, that could have some pretty serious health consequences. So that's something where the FTC is going to be particularly aggressive in going after people, and probably the FDA too. But so in this case, we see that to show that a false claim has been made, that there's been deception in an advertisement, the FTC has to establish either that the representation explicitly stated in the defendant's advertising was false, there was just, it was outright false, or that the defendant's advertising from the point of view of a reasonable consumer gives a net impression that such claims have been made that are ultimately false. So usually, again, when you're talking about just outright explicitly false claims, that's the easy one. You're not going to get examples of that. Those cases don't even go to trial. They get settled out because they're guaranteed losers for the company, right? Or for whoever was advertising. So here in this case, the Wellness Support Network court agreed with the FTC that the ads, for cure diabetes, a clinically proven natural solution, it gave the net impression that the diabetic pack is what they called this, that it was an effective treatment for diabetes, that had been, clinically proven or medically proven that it would effectively treat diabetes and that you wouldn't have to rely on other treatments. And the court found that every single one of the claims on these people's websites and on their advertisements were misleading. And I think they had a scientist actually get up there and say, no, nothing that they did was an actual clinical trial. They didn't do any blind case studies. This was all just made up bullcrap, essentially. And so Wellness Support Network, they lost. And so there you see, you can't just go around kind of making stuff up or leading people, more importantly, leading people to believe that products have endorsements or qualities that they really don't have. Especially, that's especially true in the context of medical product, even like natural product, particularly natural products. When you get into medical products proper, there's a lot more regulatory controls there. The FDA's got a very pretty aggressive policy, process, I should say, for getting prescription drugs and medical devices approved. But with natural cures, they have a little disclaimer on the vitamin bottle, will be like, this statement has not been evaluated by the FDA and should be used to treat any or cure any illness. But still, if you say, this natural solution clinically proven, if you say natural solution, you got some wiggle room. If you say clinically proven, that's probably deceptive. FTC is probably going to come after you for it. So if you get into the, all natural whatever supplements don't go around saying clinically proven unless you've had a bunch of scientists feed it to rats for a while, you know, and write down what happens, or however these scientists do it. So For Loco, and they gave the, did you all ever, you ever see For Loco? Did you ever try it? It's gross. It's really gross. It's like drunks are obnoxious. Hyper drunks are like, they're the worst. And that's essentially what this was. But they were accused of deceptive marketing because apparently they said it's got as much alcohol as 1 or 2 beers. And it implied that you could safely drink one in one sitting and be okay. What does that mean, be okay? Like you could drive, or I don't know what they meant by, oh, you could drink one and you'd be fine. You'd be totally fine. But they say actually it had 4 to 5 times the amount of alcohol as, you know, or it had as much alcohol as 4 to 5 beers. I mean, just look at the can, 12% alcohol. It's like a can like that big. That's just math, you know, but I guess that's deceptive. And I mean, it's, you know, it's all college kids drinking it. And I mean, you guys are out of college, so I can say this, you know, college kids are so dumb, you know, we're all college graduates, right? We've moved on. But I really didn't get that example. It was like, first off, it tastes like crap. You know, you're kind of, it joke's on you if you're drinking that stuff. But to say it actually has the alcohol of 4 to 5 beers, who cares? But people shouldn't be drinking it regardless. But it is what it is. Pay-per-click advertisements. Y'all see any ethical issues? You know, you all know pay-per-click. So that's, you know, websites will, you click on an advertisement, they get, you know, they get a penny or whatever. Are there any ethical considerations in pay-per-click? You think is it that big a deal?
I mean, you could have like an ad saying like, click here if you don't want your computer to like get a virus or something. But your computer like feels like your computer has 89 viruses. Click here.
Yeah, that's especially for, you know, older people. Be like, what? Oh no, and they'll totally click on it. Yeah, well, I mean, that's like an outright. I think that you could argue that might be even an outright deceptive advertisement, just because, you know, probably. I mean, your computer probably has some viruses, but how does your computer have 89 viruses? How would they know that? You know. You know, I think that I agree in that context. Yeah, that'd be you're misrepresenting to people. You're tricking people into clicking on an ad. Is the model just entirely, you know, there are ethical considerations in terms of just the pay-per-click model itself?
I mean, increasing incentive to click, persuade the buyer. You're persuading them to click rather than to like learn more about a product.
Well,
That's the whole purpose of all advertising, is to persuade you to do what they want you to do.
yeah, that is ultimately to create, what is it? Create the anxiety that can only be filled by hitting add to cart. Don, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I mean, you know, as long as it's, I click on it, I'm not the one paying it.
Yeah.
I mean, so long as the advertiser or the carrier doing a transaction, it's no different than paying NBC to put up a commercial for a community event down here in town. It doesn't cost the consumer anything.
Yeah.
It's
And
not
that's,
offensive or deceptive.
yeah, well, maybe,
Well,
unless it's,
it could be
you know,
deceptive. It's
you're
not deceptive, I believe.
yeah. So I think it's something that you would argue maybe that it just depends on the advertisement itself. You don't see a problem with the model, just depends on whether the ad itself is deceptive or not.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think they're legitimate arguments either way, but certainly I think we can all agree if the ad is deceptive in itself, then yeah, there are certainly ethical considerations there. So we transition from there to the Lanham Act of 1946. Now, what is the Lanham Act?
Distinctive products. We gave the products that are distinctive, not generic.
Which
I was
is,
really forgetting
yeah, for what?
that.
Trademark. So Lanham Act is the trademark law. That's one of the major areas of intellectual property. patents, trademarks, and copyrights. And it established a registration process for trademarks, where you can say this trademark is ours, we have this unique business name or logo. It'd be like Coca-Cola, it's trademarked, right? A lot of times you will see product names, often they'll just have the R, little circle. That means is all rights reserved. And that's kind of an expansive all intellectual property rights. That includes copyrights, trademarks. Often they'll do that if they don't have their trademark yet, if they're currently they're in the trademark application process, they're reserving all their rights with respect to that application process and with respect to their copyright rights, copyright rights. But so creates a trademark. And again, that's that booking.com case that y'all just wrote your briefs on, right? It talked a lot about the Lanham Act. Yes.
I have a question about, so are trademarks granted for, is it a 20-year period like other IPs, or?
It's patents have 20 years. Trademarks, I can't remember. I'm not sure what the period is. I don't know if it's 20 years or not. You do have to renew them. They can go dead. You can lose trademark protection if you don't maintain it. And it's just a kind of an obnoxious, just like maintaining a business name with the Secretary of State or something like that.
And that becomes relevant because if you're going to trademark, protect by registering a mark with the USPTO, that could long survive your ownership of a particular domain name.
Yeah. And there are actually a lot of people, particularly about 20 years ago, there were a lot of people that would buy up domain names that they knew would be like, okay, some Coca-Cola.com it's coming. We know it's coming. So they would buy, they'd buy domain names. And in some cases, they'd be able to even get, and it would kind of work on both ways. They'd buy a domain name and even get a trademark on it. And then that essentially, they've just leveraged themselves and put themselves in a position where if this thing takes off, they're gonna have to pay me money if they want that domain name or if they want that trademark. And then in some cases, they buy a domain name and then there'd be a trademark, this company would already have a trademark and they would say, well, you bought this domain name, that's our name, it's a unique name, unique business name that we have trademark rights to. And that would then give the company leverage to acquire that domain name without having to meet the ridiculous demands of this, .com buyer, right? Now, that was kind of a unique little period in time with the dramatic rise of the public use of the internet. But yeah, that is something that definitely did happen and still happens to a certain extent. Did I answer what you were really getting at there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did.
Okay. So Lanham Act establishes trademarks. Now you can register it's actually uspto.gov and you can register. It's like $225, but you have to jump through all the hoops. And if you don't do that, it will go dead or they'll deny your application. But more importantly, for purposes of what the book was talking about, is it also established a cause of action for competitors. And this is distinct from what the FTC could do, but competitors could sue other companies, their competition, for false or misleading advertisements. Chevy could sue Ford because Ford in their advertisement says, that Ford trucks can pull 1,500 more pounds than Chevy trucks. And Chevy runs a test and they're like, no, that's not true. You're damaging our businesses by our goods, our market share, our share of the truck market by saying you can't pull as much with a Chevy truck. I don't know if that's really happened. It's just kind of an example of what they could do. The book gives you the Palm Wonderful versus Coca-Cola case. And now who remembers what happened in that case?
Advertise pomegranate blueberry
Yeah,
juice. It was like 5% pomegranate and blueberry juice.
yeah, like very little juice. It was actually Minute Maid. I keep talking about Coca-Cola. It was under Minute Maid. So you're like pomegranate blueberry Coke? That sounds terrible. But it was their Minute Maid move. It was like it was apple juice with like a drop of pomegranate juice in it, but it had pomegranate blueberry in big, big bold letters, right? And so Palm Wonderful, they sue and they say, listen, we grow pomegranates and we hand squeeze fresh pomegranates. And you all have pomegranate juice. You ever had Palm Wonderful? It's pretty good. It's expensive though. So, but it's good. I'm sure it's better than the Minute Maid, but it's a lot more expensive. So Palm Wonderful, they sue and they say, listen, this is misleading. You're hurting our market share. It's hurt our sales because you got people believing. And of course, Coke did it because Palm Wonderful came out with all these pomegranate drinks and people are like, oh, pomegranate's the big new thing. Everybody's got to drink pomegranate juice. And so Coke wants to cash in. They buy like 8 pomegranates and throw it into a giant vat of apple juice. And they're like, all right, we got pomegranate juice, get it out there. And then start making a bunch of money off of it, right? And Palm says, well, listen, this hurt our sales. We showed that, and they did show that it had 0.3% pomegranate juice and 0.2% blueberry juice in it, but they're calling it pomegranate blueberry instead of apple, with essence of pomegranate. And Coke argues that the FDCA, and again, that's the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, it allows use of the label, that essentially that the FDCA is what governs what labels you can put on food and on drugs and cosmetics. And they say it predates the Lanham Act, therefore it overrules the Lanham Act. We're gonna say, listen, if we comply with the FDCA, then who cares what the Lanham Act says? This is the older act, it's been around longer, we win. Supreme Court, and Coke actually were granted summary judgment at the lower court level. And again, summary judgment is where there are no facts in dispute. The court rules on it as a matter of law. Jury doesn't need to hear this. We can just say, this is what the law says. And they say, and the lower courts agreed. And Supreme Court said, no, we are overruling summary judgment. They say, actually, these two acts, the FDCA and the Lanham Act, are complementary to each other rather than conflicting with one another. Because essentially the idea is with the FDCA is that's the government regulating specific information that you're putting on your food labels, like nutritional facts, right? And how you label your food. But it has nothing to do with how you market your food, right? Unless it's in violation of their requirements for what information you include on your label. Essentially, the idea behind the FDCA is you're protecting public health and safety. That's the goal of the FDCA, is we're keeping people from, they're going to know what's in their food. They can know, particularly, talking about diabetes, they can know, hey, the sugar content in this is super high. Again, I don't know much about diabetes beyond that, but that plays a role, right? So they need to know what the sugar content is. But the Lanham Act, rather than protecting health and safety, protecting the amount of pomegranate people are getting in their drink, is protecting commercial interests against unfair competition. And that's what Palm Wonderful was arguing here is, Coke was just trying to cash in on the pomegranate craze by, having this drink that they call pomegranate blueberry, which had barely any pomegranate or blueberry in it, probably had some food coloring to make it more red than apple juice normally is. The court says, no, we're overturning summary judgment, reverse and remand, like you see at the end of some of these opinions you wrote your briefs on, which means they kick it back down to the trial court. Does anybody know what happened with that case ultimately? Yeah, the jury said, no, it's not unfair. I mean, it says 0.3% and 0.2%. It says it right there. So it's not misleading. It's not unfair competition. So 8 years of litigation going all the way to Supreme Court, all just to lose. They're like, we've lost all this money in sales, and now you lost all this money paying lawyers to lose. So it doesn't always work out, but that option is there. That's what the Lanham Act. Again, the trademark registration process, that's more basic. They're just setting up, how you apply for and get a trademark from the government, from the PTO. But more importantly, it creates that private cause of action for these companies to go after their competition for false and misleading advertisements. That again, it's not so much like what we're talking about with the FTC. It's more in terms of they're misleading the public to drive sales towards them and away from the competition. Does that make sense? That kind of distinction there. So, book, and then the book has this creative code of American Association of Advertising Agencies, saying that they'll not knowingly create advertising that contains false or misleading statements or exaggerations or testimonials that do not reflect real opinions of individuals, misleading price claims, all stuff that basically it's like, well, you already can't do that because the FTC will come after you if you do. But, you know, it makes you feel good, I guess. And then they do say, you know, statements that are offensive to public, you know, public decency or minority segments of the population. I think that's the one part of their creative code that is not already like, well, hey, that's already, you can't do that under FTC, you know, regulations and guidelines. So, I mean, that's great, you know, good for you, but, you know, making a code, it's like, I'm going to make a code that I will not, you know, run people over and steal stuff. It's like, I can't already do that. So, yeah, I'm like, I will follow the law. Very simple. One line to the code. One, I will follow the law. That's it. So we got a fight breaking out over here. Everything all right? Well, you knocked him out. I mean, he's out cold. Good Lord. So commercialization of childhood. This is like basically commercials for Cocoa Puffs and stuff, right? So they did these studies, Saturday morning cartoons, ads are largely food. You know, it's like 63% food or something like that. 64% of ads for children on Saturday morning cartoons were for food. And they said none were for fruits and vegetables, except for a few public service announcements. Then they point out, I mean, it should be obvious that food's not branded. You know, the farmers, they're a little busy. You don't have time to make ads to be like, hey, buy carrots. You know, that's not nearly as exciting as Fruity Pebbles, right? Why have apples and bananas when you can get it all in your Fruity Pebbles? So, about like Happy Meals, that was like the ultimate, you know, I talk about successful advertising, Happy Meals. And then when they started putting the cash in, it's like, man, you'll hear about that they're paying all the, well, you're wearing the shirt, you know, they're paying all the players with like bags full of, you could get a Happy Meal and they would just stuff 80 grand in it. I bet that you're trying to hear about this. It was like Pruitt got fired for this stuff. That's like the whole reason. They were paying players like Happy Meals, stuff full of cash. Mike, you want to talk about Happy Meals? Like a big smile on my face. But I'd be like, where's the toy? I got the money. Where's the toy? But so, and they talk about, you know, they would, these food companies, and again, we're talking about fast food and like soda companies, you know, like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, the General Mills, sugary cereals, and they'd link up with, you know, a movie would come out, Harry Potter, and they'd be like, I get the Harry Potter meal, you know, and they're just marketing junk food to children. The book talks about rising childhood obesity rates, and again, you know, diabetes is probably directly responsible for the rise in type 2 diabetes. And like in the soft drink companies, they'll have contracts with schools, with high schools and elementary schools. They'll have contracts where they can go and directly sell their products just directly to the kids, have the vending machine where they can go buy a Coke instead of a little thing of milk, you know, from their school, from the cafeteria. And like the McSpell-It Club, they talk about McDonald's will try to, you know, we're promoting education. Get a Happy Meal in the meantime, you know, while you're working on your homework. Why not eat a cheeseburger and have a Coke? So that does, again, as always, we circle back to the ethical considerations here. What are the ethical concerns of these companies that market directly to children unhealthy food that's going to, in the long run or even in the short run, you know, harm these children? It harms their development. It leads to childhood obesity, development of diabetes. You know, is it ethical for these people, the companies, to do it? Austin, with us.
Yeah, it's not the healthiest meals, obviously, but exclusively, it's not you can say McDonald's is exclusively responsible for causing. this
Yeah.
type of these things.
It's like, what about Burger King? You know, they had a hand in this too,
Well, I mean,
right? Was that comment brought to us by McDonald's, Austin?
what's that?
Is that comment brought to us by McDonald's?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
but no, I mean, yeah, and you know, that's kind of that's certainly a very valid counter argument to say, listen, these companies, as the Supreme Court has recognized, companies have they have the First Amendment right to commercial free speech. Now, it's not as unfettered as you know, ordinary free speech, if you want to call it that. So to say, well, just because parents are, and it's not like these children can go buy this stuff themselves. It's not like they're, you know, driving over to McDonald's. That did happen. There was one news article where some bratty little kid who got mad. His parents wouldn't take him to McDonald's, so he just stole their car. And it's like, well, that's really extreme. Like, that really doesn't happen very often. But yeah, again, generally, these children aren't going and buying this stuff themselves. But, you know, they see the commercials and they want it, and they, you know, they pout and stamp their feet until their parents say, fine, if you'll shut up, I will go buy you McDonald's. But it comes back to that's just parenting. You got to make those decisions. You say, listen, you know, I'll give you McDonald's as a treat, but I'm not going to buy you McDonald's every day. I don't care the commercials that you watch and you think it looks, you know, it looks good and it'll make you cool. You know, I don't want my child to be raised on an unhealthy diet, right? Yes, Mary. Yeah, I think there's a fair argument for that. You know, it is hard to, they have what they call food deserts, where, you know, fresh produce and you know, food that you would find in regular grocery stores just aren't available in some neighborhoods. All there is not all there is, but, you know, just McDonald's and like the local gas station snacks from the local gas stations, really all that's available. I think there's certainly some validity to that. It's probably not quite as bad as some people want to make it out to be. You know, maybe you have to go a little bit out of your way, but, you know, we all do. You know, it's like I cook almost every night, but that takes hours out of my nights. You know, that's a pain. Not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone enjoys doing that. Not everyone has the time to do it. It's often a lot easier, especially, you know, single parents or even, you know, married couples that don't make a lot of money. It's a whole lot easier to come back, you're tired from working all day, just go buy your kid a Happy Meal, and, you know, it keeps him quiet for a couple of hours, and you get to, you know, catch up on your Netflix or whatever. But yeah, I think, you know, I think there's truth to both sides of that argument. You know, the companies do have, again, the Supreme Court's recognized they've got a First Amendment right to let consumers know what options are out there. And that option is delicious Happy Meals, you know? So just because parents go and buy their kid, you know, one Happy Meal every single day, and so now their child is overweight, well, is that McDonald's fault? You know, or they're not forcing these parents to go buy this stuff. But, you know, the flip side is I think it does. You certainly can make the argument that when the only commercials that are out there for these children, what these companies are pushing, or the companies that are pushing these advertisements to children, sell things that, if consumed to excess, are not healthy, right?
I had a good friend tell me that kids are professional askers.
Oh, yeah.
That's what they are.
Yeah.
And then when they're reinforced with TV commercials, it helps them, embolden them to keep doing that. The parents will break down.
Yeah.
Which is too bad.
Well, and again, it's easier a lot of times. I think especially for single parent households, it can be particularly tough, you know, when you're having to work. And then you come home and you're already tired, and it's just, you know, buy me this, buy me this. Okay, just be quiet. But yeah, no, I think there's a very good argument for that. But you know, and that's they were talking about the appealing to the cool with ads, right? And the kids, especially as they get older, but the kids are always, I remember when I was a kid, it's like, you want to do what you see on these ads. I'm like, God, that looks so cool, right? You want to get, the oppositional attitudes, portraying adults as just lame and they're just boring and they're always, all they want to do is it's all rules and homework and God, adults are so lame, but junk food is cool. And your parents don't want you to eat junk food, right? So it's like, if you eat junk food, you're cool and you're like opposing your parents. That's kind of the idea that they push in this thing is it's the anti-adultism. And I think the book, and this is a bit ridiculous. And they're like, kids want to get hyper, like it's college kids wanting to get stoned or something, and it's like, it's a bit extreme, but yeah, some of these kids do like to get all hopped up on Mountain Dew. Right. And what was that movie? Job, exactly. Get all hopped up on Mountain Dew. So there was actually, talking about these commercials, there's a case I studied in law school. It was just ridiculous. Pepsi had these commercials, I think in the 90s, where it was, if you get Pepsi points, and you buy so many cans, if you had 30,000 Pepsi points, they'd get you like a leather jacket or something. And they had the commercial ends with, and if you get 2 billion Pepsi points, it's like a fighter jet lands outside of an elementary school and the kid jumps out of it. And of course, this kid was probably one of the Kardashians. This kid's father was a rich, high-powered attorney in California. So he just bought him just all the Pepsi, just to get all the Pepsi in California. This guy he got to the point that he had literally 2 billion or whatever it was, Pepsi points. And then he sent off and he said, "I want my jet. Where's my fighter jet?" And Pepsi was like, "We're not giving you a fighter jet. Did you think that was serious?" And the kid's father sued Pepsi because they didn't give him the fighter jet. And the court, the judge, he was like, "Nothing ruins a good joke like having to explain it. But I'm going to explain to you in detail why Pepsi advertising you could get a fighter jet was clearly a joke." But they literally, the guy, like the father, not the child, the father had to go file this lawsuit. Hopefully he got disbarred. It's like, you're a lawyer and you're that dumb. But I mean, he made more money than me, so he was a real idiot. But anyway, yeah, that was a book didn't tell you. That one's from law school. But I always thought that was an interesting case. I'm like, that guy really, he bought his kid all that Pepsi. And then he sued Pepsi when he didn't get a fighter jet. These people are morons. But so anyway, speaking of, we got in Coke, they talk about Coke campaigning to focus on exercise instead of diet. They're saying, don't worry about drinking all these sugary drinks. You just need to focus on exercise, and then it's no big deal, right? Does that raise any ethical issues there? To say, listen, it's not the sugary drinks. It's not all the sugar you're consuming. It's that you're not getting out there and exercising enough. I know you think there's no ethical problems.
That's great. Especially about
They do. It tastes different from McDonald's, I will say. Like, I think they've got a different formula. Like, they mix it differently. Yeah, they just like, yeah. Well, are there any ethical issues there to say distract from? No, it's not the sugary drinks. You should still buy those, and it actually gives you energy to exercise. My only Coke, I think they own Gatorade, or maybe Pepsi owns Gatorade, Coke owns Powerade. So it's like you get your sugar fix from that anyway, and that's marketed directly to athletes, and it's got like the same sugar content as Coke. So, who cares? But I don't know. Does anybody see any ethical issues with that? No, I don't. Yeah. The book sees ethical issues with like everything, everything's an ethical issue, except giving tobacco to the Sioux. But then they've got, they do talk about, they advertise vegetables with superpowers, and that resulted in kids eating more vegetables, so should we be making advertisements that make vegetables and fruits and vegetables seem cool? or is it again come back to, listen, it's on the parents? If your child is ruling you, you maybe, I'm not going to say you shouldn't have children. That's terrible, but but maybe you should like rethink your parenting strategy here. Put a little more effort into it. I don't know, but then the book they talk, vegetables with superpowers. Then they don't talk about Veggie Tales. Y'all ever heard of that show? It's like directly I guess these vegetable cartoon characters like CGI, whatever they are, but it's like advocating this Christian message. I bet the book wouldn't like that. I don't know. Maybe they would. I don't know, but I don't think they would. I really don't get the impression that they would be okay with that. They'd say this is moralizing. Are there ethical issues here? Yeah, they would definitely ask that question, right? But so that's kind of the section of the book talking about appealing to children. I think there are legitimate ethical concerns in there. How serious are they? I don't think that's serious. I do think that it really is ultimately falls on parents to raise their children in a way that they're not feeding them Happy Meals, every meal of the week or every day of the week. But it's something to contemplate. And it does, I think these corporations do have there's a certain power disparity there. And it does, and I think we can, I don't know, feel free to disagree with me, but I think advertisements can be very powerful. They can influence people, certainly their spending habits, that's the goal, but they can also influence people's perceptions in terms of, what society tells them is cool. And in a lot of ways, corporations can actually dictate, you see with like the Nike commercial, what is perceived as socially acceptable, or kind of what is the socially right thing to do. But I think that's a mixed bag. I think that's a two-way street. I think a lot of times corporations are responding to what they perceive as the direction in which society is heading, but they can also influence that to a certain degree. So, and direct to pharmaceutical advertising, which is the last section of the book, or the chapter, not the book. Don't get too excited. Last section of the chapter. And this is, and you see these commercials probably more than any other, I mean, not more than any other, but they're more common now than they ever have been. You see the commercial for, depression medication, and the side effects include, suicide. And you're like, I thought this was depression medication, but still just good old Bayer. That's all you need. Keep the heart attacks at bay. That's effective advertising. I'm always like, oh, pop a Bayer, and immediately I'm like, oh, thank God, I'm good. The generic doesn't work. It's the Bayer because they've got the ads, right? So direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising. That's the what was her name? Saray Perez versus Wyeth Labs. In the book, it starts off the majority opinion. This is one where they give you kind of this cut and paste. The majority opinion just gives you kind of the basic law. And then you get to the dissenting opinion, and it starts talking about the specific product. You're like, wait, what? Did they even tell us what the product was until the dissent? And I had to go back and look at it, and I'm like, no, they never even told you. They just tell you that they don't tell you the name till the dissenting opinion, which was kind of weird. But they can't publish the entire. If you had to read the entire opinion, you all have read the Supreme Court opinions. You would all transfer out of this class if you had to read every actual opinion. And I wouldn't blame you. I wouldn't blame you at all. But the book gets into the history of it. This all direct to consumer pharmaceutical advertising, of course, started with Rogaine and then Viagra. They were really the driving force behind all this. Have you all ever seen the movie Idiocracy? Oh, highly recommend it. But yeah, it's basically there. Everyone's just worried about, growing their hair and being able to get an erection is essentially what this comes down to, right? And that's, again, you all should really watch that movie if you've not seen it. It's very funny. But that's really, that is where it began. Rogaine started it all. Male impotence and baldness is, I guess people just don't feel comfortable talking with their doctors about it. So they see an ad, then they can just go be like, hey, what about Rogaine? Just quietly say it, because it's an uncomfortable conversation to have with people. I know all about it. So, the majority opinion in this Perez versus Wyeth Labs talks about, the kind of traditional doctor-patient relationship. And this, it gets into what we're going to get to. The real point is the learned intermediary doctrine, which still exists in all states except West Virginia. I don't know why West Virginia doesn't use it, but I suspect that the opiate epidemic in West Virginia probably plays a role in that to some extent. But the majority opinion here talks about how the kind of doctor knows best concept, the traditional role that they call it, like the Norman Rockwell family doctor, doesn't exist anymore, right? People are, I haven't been to the doctor in like 10 years, but I assume you go to the doctor now and you're just kind of in and out. You don't really, with rare exceptions, this is what the majority opinion says, with rare exceptions, you're not going to have that really intimate relationship with a doctor where you can just call them up out of the blue and talk to them about, hey, back's hurting a little bit, doc, what's going on here. That's not, doesn't really happen anymore. It's a large scale business now. They just want you in and out, and they want to be, the more patients, the more money they make, or the more money the hospitals make. So they push the doctors to see more patients. So that's really, they say, listen, this is the learned intermediary doctrine in this case. They say it should not apply. What the learned intermediary doctrine, that's not very easy to say, learned intermediary doctrine. The concept behind that is that manufacturers and advertisers of prescription drugs, again, prescription drugs here, not over the counter, do not have to disclose all the side effects and dangerous parts of their drugs, because they instruct the physician, and the physician is better suited to know, understands how drugs work, how they interact with the body, and the physician can then advise the patient, the ultimate end consumer, say, listen, make sure you don't take this with alcohol, don't take this one in the morning, whatever the case may be. If you start feeling this symptom after a couple of weeks, let me know, we'll get you off this drug. That's the basic premise behind the learned intermediary doctrine, is they essentially can just push that liability onto the doctor if some kind of harm results from an end consumer's use of a prescription drug. And again, that's prescription drugs only. And the premises behind it, or I guess the rationale behind it, is courts don't want to intrude on the doctor-patient relationship. That's one of the few relationships that's viewed as sort of sacred, not sacred, but, there's a lot of confidentiality, and they don't, people need to be able to consult freely with their doctor to get appropriate medical treatment, so you don't, die of cancer, whatever the case may be. They think physicians are better suited to convey meaningful information about prescription drugs, which is true in a lot of instances. Drug companies lack effective means of direct communication with end users, so they rely on physicians. Is that really true anymore? No, it's really not at all. But and then also complexity and comprehension problems, which is really what I was getting at earlier, which is doctors they understand prescription drugs, they understand their effects on the body better than a just average person is going to, but as court says here, in this case, majority opinion is saying, listen, this doesn't really apply anymore. Doctors don't spend as much time with patients. There are ads all over the place. You've got TV ads, just constant TV ads that are, they're telling you, hey, ads for psoriasis, and you name it. There are medical conditions you didn't know existed, but now there's a drug to treat. So, so there's that. But, and I think is this the case? I think, and I didn't write this down. No, it was the McDonald versus Ortho Farms. They talk about oral contraceptives caused a stroke. And I think this is what the majority was talking about. Hey, in this case, this woman getting this oral contraceptive, right? And she goes to the doctor once a year to get it refilled, and the doctor just fills the script. There's not really any time for a lot of interaction with the physician. That's something they sort of relied on to say, look, here's an example of why, in a prior case, of why the learned intermediary doctrine really isn't appropriate anymore, at least for purposes of this case, is what the court is arguing. There's little time for the patient to consult with the physician, and it's sort of relegated the physician to a more passive role. They're just saying, hey, and I think there is a lot of validity to, you see more and more of these ads, you'll get more and more patients or consumers that will go to their doctor and they say, listen, I saw an ad for this drug and I want to try it. And ask your doctor about, I can't think of the name. They always have these weird names. I almost said Zyrtec, but that's like Xarelto. Yeah. So like they just come up with, I think they spend more time coming up with the names than anything else. But yeah, that's right. You gotta have those. But so and I think there's some truth to that, these physicians being relegated to a passive role. And they just say, like, so in that McDonald case, they say, listen, this woman had a stroke from these oral contraceptives, but it's not like she was regularly talking to her doctor about, hey, I'm feeling this symptom from this oral contraceptive or something to that effect. And so the court argues, they say the direct marketing of drugs to consumers generates, a corresponding duty requiring manufacturers to warn of defects in the product. Now, stepping back from the medical side of it, when it comes to products liability generally, manufacturers of, any product you can think of, outside the medical context here, you're talking about a tool or something like that, there is a general duty to warn of any known defects or of any known dangers in a product. And the court here is saying, even though the learned intermediary doctrine traditionally would shield a drug manufacturer, prescription drug manufacturer from liability, if you're going to market directly to consumers, you're going to say, listen, use this drug and it's going to help you with whatever your ailment is. You've got a duty then, you've taken a duty on yourself by taking advantage of the ability to market directly to consumers. You're going to have a corresponding duty to let people know of any of the dangers associated with that product. If you're, and I think they do, bless you, they will say now, like a lot of, and pretty much all those commercials now, the side effects are, it's 3/4 of the commercial is them reading off all the side effects. But, do you all agree with the majority there? Do you think that that's fair to say, if you're going to market directly to consumers, if you're going to push these drugs to say, hey, go ask your doctor about this drug, should they have that duty to warn about defects or side effects? They call them defects. That's probably side effects would be a better way to phrase it. I mean, I think that's a fair ruling.
Yeah, I didn't really understand that.
I think that's I think it's perfectly fair. Of course, I'm a lawyer that would just love to sue a drug company. So it's like, of course I agree. I'm like, absolutely, there was a duty and they breached it, but they can fix it in exchange for a lot of money. But so the dissent though, and then you don't even know what drug they're talking about in this Perez case with Wyeth Labs until you get to like, Norplant is a drug that is surgically implanted. And you're like, what is Norplant? And I scroll back and I'm like, they never talk about it until the dissent. But so apparently what was actually at issue in this case, and really they only give you this case to introduce the concept of the learned intermediary doctrine. And that's more important than the particular details of the case. But here the dissent says, listen, this was a drug that was actually surgically implanted. You had to go and the doctor had to make a little cut and stick it inside of you. It was a birth control device. And the dissent argued, in this case, the learned intermediary doctrine should still apply because, again, there was sufficient interaction with the physician that, and it was a sufficiently complex drug that just advertising it, the manufacturers, what the dissent is arguing is that the manufacturers should still be able to have that kind of shield of the learned intermediary doctrine based simply on the complexity of the drug and on the level of interaction required between the patient and the physician. So if it was, the McDonald versus Ortho case where it's an oral contraceptive, and there you go, and they go get it from the pharmacy, and just take a pill causes them to have a stroke, the dissent would probably even agree that, okay, that case, maybe the learned intermediary doctrine isn't appropriate, but here, if it's a surgically implanted device, well, that necessarily entails that, more complex and detailed interaction between the physician and the patient. And, the courts shouldn't be interfering with that. And then he says, that they make the dissent kind of makes fun of the majority, talking about the Norman Rockwell doctor-patient relationship doesn't exist anymore. And did Norman Rockwell like paint a picture of a doctor and a patient or something? He's the painter, right? And all the classic kind of American life. Probably he did, because he did like one in church and a jury, and he's got a picture of everything from the 50s. But so I don't know. That's you all think the dissent, once you learn what the product actually is, you think the dissent makes a fair argument there?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I didn't really understand it, so you explained it here.
Yeah, it's not a.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's a surgical procedure, obviously the doctor is very involved in making like an incision in the arm or something.
Yeah. That's that's a legitimate, yeah. But then you look at the, and you get, that can get real complex, they're just giving you kind of the surface level, I guess, concept behind that doctrine, but it can get pretty complex, especially when you start talking about medical malpractice, and it's kind of its interplay with drug manufacturers' liability and medical products manufacturers' liability, because then you get into the questions of, well, how much information did these drug manufacturers actually impart to these physicians? And a lot of times these, I've got a cousin who, she's married to a doctor. They've been married for several years. And I mean, it's cousin, she's great. And her husband's great guy, great people. But she was a pharmaceutical rep. And I think she had a plan. She was a pharmaceutical rep for maybe like a year and a half. Met her husband, he's a doctor. And then it's like, I don't have to be a pharmaceutical rep anymore. So there's some real scheming going on. But again, great people. Glad they met. They've got like 4 beautiful, wonderful kids. But these pharmaceutical, my point with that is, the pharmaceutical reps are basically just like salespeople. They're not these, she wasn't some like incredibly learned pharmaceutical person that's like involved in the manufacture and could tell you like the chemical breakdown of these drugs and their interactions with the body. She's just going in. It's like basically they take the doctors to dinner, and they've actually done a study where they find if a pharmaceutical company takes a doctor out to dinner, that doctor is much more likely to prescribe that drug than a competitor's drug, or a drug that treats the same condition but in a different way. And that might even be a better drug. But hey, they didn't take that doctor out to dinner, and everybody likes a free meal. And doctors are people too, right? They're easily susceptible to flattery and gifts and persuasion. So there's some ethical issues. That book doesn't really get into that, but it can get. This is a pretty complex area. Really, all you need to know for purposes of the class is the learned intermediary doctrine and kind of its application in terms of direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertisements. And I really do think, it is not, again, most states still do use the learned intermediary doctrine. It still applies in most states. They do say specifically that it does not imply, Courtney, do you have the mouse? Keep that from restarting on us.
That mouse is over there.
Uh-oh. Not now. Okay. We're actually going to be done here pretty soon anyway, so maybe I didn't have to do that. But again, in terms of direct consumer pharmaceutical advertising, I do think the majority is right here that, if you're going to push these products directly to people who aren't trained medical professionals, and especially people who are like, I'm dealing with this medical issue, boy, this would be great if this drug could make my life better. then you need to let people know it could make this part of your life better, but it'll make some other parts pretty awful. You know, is you take the heart attack medication, but it makes you, you know, lose your hair and have diarrhea the rest of your life. And you're like, well, you gotta weigh the pros and cons, right? So I think it is fair, but the learned intermediary doctrine, I don't think it's at the same time, you can't just wholesale do away with it. But we've got to find kind of a balancing act there. You can't have, and I think the courts have, I think that this case shows that the majority of judges in these appeals courts agree that, you know, there are a lot of situations now, a lot of instances now where the learned intermediary doctrine should not apply, simply because, again, these pharmaceutical companies have the means and use those means extensively to push their products directly to consumers who are not trained medical people. They don't know, they're not going to know all the ins and outs of how these drugs will interact with their bodies. So you think there are any viable alternatives to the learned intermediary doctrine?
Us in New Zealand or somewhere, I think are the only two that allow the direct to consumer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there would, I mean, should we allow direct consumer pharmaceutical advertising? Anybody think we should not?
It goes back to, didn't allow that to clearly place the liability or burden on the doctor.
Yeah, and there's a big, especially in states like Tennessee, is very much a doctor-friendly state. It's very hard to sue doctors. So if you shield the manufacturers of these drugs from liability and put it all on doctors, and it's extremely difficult to pin liability on doctors, and it's extremely expensive to do so, then is the consumer ultimately harmed more that way, you know? And they also don't have the benefit of knowing about all these different drugs with weird names that solve all sorts of problems that we didn't even know existed. Yeah, I don't know.
I think managed healthcare is part of the problem. Fundamentally, it's part of the problem.
Yeah, you're looking really big picture here. But I mean, how so?
I'm sorry.
How so? I mean,
Well,
elaborate a little bit.
I mean, so doctors aren't allowed to have relationships with customers, with their customer, with their patient any longer because the machine makes them turn to make people approve. So they can't develop that.
Yeah.
And furthermore, we're so short-sighted, we're so distracted in everyday life that we often don't care because we tend to be more self-centered on what it is that's in our world that's important to us. So how can you have faith in a physician, your physician, if he's not paying attention to you, to give you the best care to keep you informed? So we kind of have to be informed. It's good for us to be informed, but we're not qualified to be fully informed as we need to for some of these very complicated issues.
Yeah. And I think and clearly it's more than just, yeah, I mean, you're hitting on things that's more than just direct consumer advertising. It's part of it. It's one part of a bigger problem, right? So yeah, when the book asks, what are some viable alternatives? Well, boy, if we could figure this out, you know, we wouldn't have to be sitting here reading this textbook, would we? We'd be racing our yacht against Bill Gates's yacht, right? But no, I think you're exactly right, Don. That's well, we're wrapped up here. Has anybody got any questions, comments, concerns, complaints? Anything? Nobody? I think we're good here. Again, good job on second case brief, everybody. I was happy to see improvement. Hope it continues. And we've got 2 more classes. No more case briefs. You've submitted your third case brief. So it'll just be the exam. We'll talk next week will be the same as usual. And then our last week, we will go over, I'll kind of try to do for at least part of the class, kind of a general review of the major concepts and points to kind of get you all ready for the final exam. Unless Courtney's going to tell me the final exam's like next week.
I think it's the third. I think it's the day.
That's crazy. Why would we have class after the final exam? I may move that date. Because the last class is the 8th.
I just looked and it said the final exam was due like the 3rd at 8 p.m.
Oh, man, that's crazy. Well, I'll look at that. Maybe we'll do the review next week. And then what will we do for the final week? Well, that's weird. Maybe we'll move the exam. I don't know. I'll let you all know. I'll try to email everybody, or I'll just let you know, come next week. But, final exam it's multiple choice, and it's going to just cover the concepts. It's going to be primarily confined to what we've covered with the book. So it's nothing to stress out too much about, just as long as you've kind of paid attention and jotted down notes where appropriate. None of my jokes will be on the exam, so you won't. I hope you didn't write those down. This professor was hilarious in college, and I would look at my notes and like, oh, all I wrote down was his jokes. And so I'd get to the exam, I'd be like, I don't remember any of this stuff. But yeah, no jokes on the exam. But we'll talk about that next week, and I'll figure out. I may email you all about that. I'll look at it because I can always count on Courtney to say, no, that's not what the syllabus says. I'm like, you got me. But I'll see you all next week.